Good afternoon. My name is Ebony Demendez. I'm your assistant superintendent, and today we are going to be reviewing Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching. The District of West Orange uses Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching to evaluate and observe all certificated staff members. So it is critical that you become familiar with the evaluation instrument itself, the different domains, the elements, which really outline what the expectations for teaching and learning are. In this evaluation instrument, you will have the rubrics for how a rating is determined and the different types of artifacts and evidence that can be included in an observation. So when we think about Danielson's framework for teaching, we're really looking at a research-based evaluation method that has various components of instruction. Those are used to specifically identify the aspects of teaching that promote improved student learning. They also define what you should know as a teacher and be able to do via your instructional practice. In the framework, there are 4 domains of teaching responsibility. They are domains 1, planning and preparation, domain 2, the classroom environment, domain 3, instruction, and domain 4, professional responsibilities. There are distinct aspects of each domain, and they then are further divided into 22 components. The components serve to define the work of the domain. And though they're distinct, they are related to one another, and they do support the work of the standards, so you will find direct relationships across the domains. So when we think specifically about domain 1, planning and preparation, we're thinking about how a teacher organizes their content, the content that the students are to learn, and how the teachers design instruction. The domain overall covers all aspects of instructional planning. It looks for a deep understanding of content and pedagogy, your understanding and appreciation of students, and it looks to measure how you engage students in learning content. In content and process, there are assessment techniques that are also observed, and we're wanting to know that they reflect your instructional outcomes and they serve to document how you are monitoring student progress. When we're thinking about designing assessment strategies, we're asking you to consider your use for formative purposes and how assessments can provide diagnostic opportunities for students to demonstrate their level of understanding. Domain 1 is considered an offstage domain, offstage being that planning and preparation is usually something that is discussed during a pre-observation conference. It's not something that's directly observed while a supervisor or a principal enters your classroom to observe your teaching and learning. While there are definite connections between domain 1, your planning, and domain 3, your instruction, your planning and preparation, again, will generally be reviewed during your pre-observation conference, and the execution of your planning and preparation will be visible or observable in domain 3. Again, planning and preparation has various components, and here we see components A through F. You are demonstrating your knowledge of content and pedagogy, the knowledge of students. You are setting your instructional outcomes. You are demonstrating knowledge of your resources. You are designing coherent instruction, and you are designing student assessments. So domain 1, planning and preparation, has 6 components that are being observed. Each component then has elements that further define the components. So for example, in component 1A, demonstrating knowledge of content and pedagogy, we're looking for the content and structure of the discipline, the prerequisite relationships, and your content-related pedagogy. So it's your understanding and your knowledge of how the structure of the discipline, how those prerequisite relationships inform that instruction, and that you're infusing content-related pedagogy into your instruction. Each of the components, 1A through F, have specific elements that are being measured, and those can be further understood by reading through the rubric that gives specific language around what does effective instruction or highly effective instruction look like. In the example we're going to review now, 1E, designing coherent instruction, we're thinking about how you're designing learning activities, how you're using your instructional materials and resources, how you are constructing your instructional groups, and how you're informing your lesson and your unit structure. So when we think about domain 1E specifically, there is a rubric that is developed for all of the components. 1A has a rubric, 1B has a rubric, and so forth. You will notice that it is broken down by ineffective, partially effective, effective, and highly effective. These are the ratings of the state of New Jersey, and our goal is always effective. Effective is where the majority of us will be, and then highly effective. There are places where we do exceed our effective instruction, and effective, however, is the place that we say we don't live in highly effective, we visit there, right? So effective is generally our goal. When we think about what that rubric looks like specifically for 1E, designing a coherent counseling program. Now, I'm going to just back up a second to say this is an excerpt from a school counselor rubric. If you recall, at the beginning of this tutorial, we said that there are rubrics specific to different specialists. So this is an example specifically for school counselors. And so then when we're thinking about effective school counseling practices around designing a coherent counseling program, here we find language or expectations for the school counselors. A school counselor plan includes important aspects of counseling in the school setting and includes school goals. Counseling programs follow an organized progression with differentiation for different groups of students, and school counselor routinely seeks input from stakeholders. Now, component 1E, this rubric is for school counselors, but there are rubrics specific to each certificated staff member, whether they be a teacher, a school counselor, a school nurse, a behavioral specialist, etc. We have a rubric for each. So that was an overview of planning and preparation. The second domain is classroom environment. And when we think about classroom environment, we are specifically considering the aspects of an environment conducive to learning. These aspects of teaching are not associated with the learning of any particular content as much as they set the stage for the learning. So sample components of domain 2 are that you establish a comfortable and respectful classroom environment, that your environment cultivates a culture for learning, and it creates a safe place for risk-taking. In this example, we're giving you a few indicators of what students are able to do when the environment is safe, when it cultivates a culture for learning, and when it is comfortable and respectful, an environment that's comfortable and respectful for both the teacher and the student. So students should be able to recall the warmth and caring their favorite teachers demonstrated, right? That's an indicator, that's an idea of what you're creating in terms of culture for learning. Students feel safe. They want their teachers to push them while conveying confidence. They're sensitive to the teacher's own attitudes toward their subjects. They're motivated by teachers who care about what they're doing, who love their subjects, and who put their heart into their teaching. Domain 2 has 5 components: creating an environment of respect and rapport, establishing a culture for learning, managing classroom procedures, managing student behavior, and organizing physical space. Again, there are specific elements that further define each component and specify what is being observed. And if we focus on 2C, managing classroom procedures, the elements really focus on instructional groups, how they're being managed in that culture of learning, in that environment, our transitions, how we're using materials and supplies, our performance of classroom routines, and the supervision of volunteers and or paraprofessionals in your classroom. Here is the rubric for domain 2, levels of teaching performance. for domain 2. And again, if we zoom into 2C, establish and maintaining clear procedures for referrals and using time effectively, this is a sample rubric for the child study team, for a learning disabilities teacher consultant. And so then effective for the CST LDTC is that they understand and consistently adhere to building and district referral procedures. They effectively set priorities, resulting in the efficient completion of evaluations and other assigned job duties. So just as a reminder that there is a rubric to each for each specialist, and the main rubric in the evaluation instrument is for teachers. We're going to move on to domain 3, which is instruction. Now, Charlotte Danielson calls this the heart of the framework. This is where everything rests and lies. And so when we think about instruction, domain 3 contains the components that are the essential heart of teaching. It's where the actual engagement of students is in the content, is with the content. It is impossible to overstate the importance of domain 3 because domain 3 reflects the primary mission of schools, which is always to enhance student learning. The components in domain 3 are unified. They're unified through a vision of students developing complex understanding, participating in a community of learners, and the components represent distinct aspects of instructional skill. The successful implementation of the plans designed in domain 1. So as we were going through domain 1, you're planning and preparing in domain 1, but here in domain 3, we're looking at the execution of that planning. And domain 3 also looks for the students to be engaged in meaningful work, which carries significance beyond the next test, right? And the classroom, but really into real life. And this is where we make connections to real life. Teachers here in domain 3, effective instruction would suggest that teachers here in domain 3 really don't have to motivate their students because the ways in which they're organizing and presenting the content and the roles they've encouraged the students to assume really produce student initiative, and they motivate themselves to learn. So here in domain 3, the work is real, it's significant, and it is important to students as well as to teachers. The components of domain 3 instruction, there are 5. 3A, communicating with students. 3B, using questioning and discussion techniques. 3C, engaging students in learning. 3D, using assessment in instruction. And 3E, demonstrating flexibility and responsiveness. Again, there are elements that further define what is the expectation for each of the components. And here we're going to hone in on 3C, engaging students in learning. Specifically, this measures activities, assignments, grouping of students, instructional materials and resources, and the structure and pacing of your lesson. So when we're thinking about the levels of teaching performance, the rubric for domain 3, and we push into 3C, here is an example from the rubric for library media specialists, which is delivery of service. 3C, engaging students with literature in learning information skills. And again, effective is our goal. So students are engaged with literature and in learning information skills because of effective design of activities, grouping strategies, and appropriate materials. The last domain is domain 4. But before going to domain 4, when we were thinking about domain 1, planning and preparation, we said domain 1 was an off-stage domain because it's generally observed and evaluated via your pre-conference. It has more to do with your planning and your preparation. Domain 4 is the other off-stage domain. This takes a look at your professional responsibilities. Again, this generally takes place during your post-observation conference. It's where we discuss your reflection on your teaching, your professional development, and how you're bringing that to your instruction. Domains 2 and 3 are considered on-stage domains, and those are considered on-stage domains because they're directly observable in the classroom. When we think about domain 4, professional responsibilities, domain 4 captures the essence of professionalism by teachers. Teachers are, as a result of their skills in domain 4, full members of the teaching profession and committed to its enhancement. Domain 4 consists of a wide range of professional responsibilities, which are self-reflection, professional growth, participation in a professional community, and the contributions you made to the profession as a whole. The components also include the interactions with families of students, contacts within the larger community, the maintenance of records and other paperwork, and advocacy for students. The components in Domain 4 are associated with being a true professional educator. They encompass the roles assumed outside of and in addition to those in the classroom with students. And so Domain 4 has 6 components reflecting on teaching, maintaining accurate records, communicating with families, participating in a professional community, growing and developing professionally, and showing professionalism. When we look at the elements that further define each of the components, we are going to push into 4A, reflecting on teaching, which I personally think is one of the most important elements or components of Domain 4, our ability to reflect on our teaching. We should do that accurately, and we should do that to inform our future teaching. And so then here are the levels of teaching performance. This is the rubric for Domain 4. And again, if we push into 4A, here's the rubric for the school nurse, and it has to do with medication policy. You'll notice that this one is specifically designed for school nurses, and effective instruction or effective practices of a school nurse in this area include implementing the district medication policy as defined. So here are the 4 domains for Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching. As we said, there are rubrics for our non-instructional staff. Those are located on our district website in our Padlet. You should review them, and the main framework for teaching, the evaluation instrument, has the rubrics for all teachers or all classroom teachers. Thank you.